Inside of the concentration camps, there were specific areas of sites set up for torture, execution, and imprisonment. Inside of Auschwitz, there was Block 11, where inmates were locked up inside tiny dungeons, known as standing cells, and they were forced to stand for days on end, unable to sit down. There was also little air that would come into these chambers, and also guards were even encouraged to invent their own torture devices to inflict suffering. But one of the most harrowing and miserable parts of the concentration camps as a whole was what went on inside some of the specific buildings where many young women were seen going in for the first time, and they would not come out possibly ever. Inside of camps such as Mauthausen, Auschwitz and Buchenwald, the SS established brothels, rooms known as joy divisions, where women were brought in to sleep with the guards or even the inmates, to make them more somehow productive. Many young female prisoners were forced to sleep with hundreds, possibly thousands of people, and they had no say in this, and they would be killed if they refused. It was claimed that they were promised release after half a year if they served in these facilities, but these promises were never kept. Join us today as we look at the torture of the women of the concentration camp brothels. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. The first concentration camp brothel opened in Mauthausen-Gusen in 1942. Following this, there would be another 9 that opened. In 1943, one opened in Auschwitz in Block 24, and then in Buchenwald months later, another opened. In 1944, Neuengamme, Dachau, Mittelbau-Dora and Sachsenhausen brothels also opened, and one opened also in Flossenburg. These rooms were built with the intentions of women prisoners being forced to, in no uncertain terms, service other prisoners and sometimes possibly even guards, and they were forced to sleep with many of them every day. These women were sent mostly from Ravensbrück concentration camp, and the majority were in their early 20s, and the Nazis thought that these facilities would incentivize workers to raise their productivity. It had somewhat of the opposite effect, and there were very few prisoners actually in a physical condition to be able to do anything. The women were subjected to terror, and they had to provide themselves to selected prisoners every evening, and also on Sunday afternoons, and the facilities were strictly regulated. The Nazi race laws were imposed in these rooms, and Germans who wanted to go to one of these rooms could only see a German woman, and a Slav prisoner would have to go see a Slav woman. Privileged prisoners such as camp functionaries or capos were allowed to frequently visit, and once the SS issued a permit to these prisoners, the men were assigned a woman, who were all medically examined. If a prisoner's name was read out at roll call each morning, then they would be marched into a building, and they had medicinal cream applied to their nether regions by a doctor, as there had been an outbreak of infection. Inside of these facilities, there was even spy holes, so the SS could check up on what was happening, and the prisoners were only given 15 minutes, and many of the women who worked in these facilities were ordered to see many men in just an hour. The brothels were usually surrounded by barbed wire fences, and small individual rooms were found inside, where around 20 female prisoners would be forced to work. It has been documented about these facilities that, and I quote, "The brothel is reserved exclusively for Aryan VIPs, but the German communists don't use it. The institution itself is located in a block marked off by barbed wire. There the green gentlemen, as in criminals who wore green triangles, and the Poles vie for the favour of the ladies, who lack for nothing. In the brothel there is liquor, foodstuffs, wine, articles of clothing and perfume. The Rapport-Führer who is in charge places great emphasis on the smooth functioning of his brothel. Every day he takes his ladies outside the camp for a walk, and he has them call him Pappy. They were also overseen by a female guard known as an Aufseherin, and the women were replaced often when they became ill or became exhausted by what they were forced to do. No Jewish prisoners were allowed to visit, and the male prisoners had to pay 2 Reichmarks for a 20-minute service, and the SS men matched the women with their clients. What is incredibly disturbing is that the women of these facilities mostly did not survive the Second World War, and some of them may have had a tattoo on their chests shaming them, and they were also often forced to undergo the harrowing forced sterilizations, and also they were forced, if they became pregnant, to have a termination inside of Auschwitz at the hands of evil SS doctors, and this also led to death. Inside of Auschwitz, it's been said that the women were mostly German or Polish who worked in that barrack, and the members of the SS and Wehrmacht were not, at Auschwitz, allowed to visit them. There was at Auschwitz another separate brothel facility established for German soldiers and SS guards, and this was found a short distance away from the camp, and all of the women who served there were German civilian ladies of the night. There were reports, though, that many of the German guards at Auschwitz abused the women inside these facilities, and let's remember what sort of people we were dealing with, those who became guards inside the SS. The women were as promised better food rations, daily baths, cigarettes, clothes and their own rooms, but they worked under very harsh conditions and got very few of the promises that they were offered. Some who volunteered based on this died inside of the camp. The women were regularly refreshed too, and one former prisoner stated that the arrival of a fresh contingent of robust Polish girls in place of the old inmates of the Frauenblock, in fact, as the prize coupon is valid for entry to the Frauenblock, for the criminals and politicals, not for Jews, who on the other hand do not feel affected by the restriction, those interested actively and rapidly cornered the market, hence the revaluation, which in any case did not last long. The women who left the facilities would usually, especially inside of Auschwitz, be sent to gas chambers too. It was said of one of these facilities that, near the entrance, a barrack was adapted for the use as a brothel, one room for the SS block leader and 10 others for prostitutes and their patrons. These were single rooms with bed linens and pictures on the walls. Block elders, capos and foremen now had an opportunity to sign their names on the waiting list for the brothel in the office, and the Rapport-Führer, or camp marshal, assigned them a certain day. The brothel was in operation after work and on Sunday afternoons. At the front door stood a table, at which the Rapport-Führer himself usually sat, and entered the patrons' prisoners' numbers on a list and collected the 5-mark bonus coupon. A prisoner orderly from the infirmary gave the patrons an injection to prevent possible diseases, and the prostitutes were assigned by the SS man. Many, especially well-informed political prisoners, did not visit the brothel, wishing to avoid exposure to SS blackmail attempts. Many an intrigue was hatched amongst the brothel patrons, and punitive transfers and floggings were a result of escapades of the camp VIPs. Inside of Buchenwald, one woman who worked inside the facility there was Frieda, and to the prisoners she was one of the first women that many had seen in months. One inmate who visited her said that, "One day I was sent to clean in the block, and I found myself alone with her. She gave me some schnapps, blew cigarette smoke into my mouth, and we landed in bed. It was my first time, and you never forget." Some inmates would look down upon those and criticise the men who visited these women, saying they should be ashamed of themselves, taking advantage of those who were suffering. A former prisoner of Auschwitz later said about one of the fellow prisoners being selected to work that, "When we found out that a girl in our block was being chosen, we caught her and threw a blanket on her and beat her up so badly that she could hardly move. It wasn't clear if she would recover. They just wanted to have a better life, and we punished them in this way." But inside of the brothels, within the concentration camps, there was a horrific amount of torture, pain and suffering, as the women were ordered to see many inmates every single day. It was forced labour of the worst kind, and they had to service male prisoners under the threat of being sent to the gas chambers if they did not. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.